They say silence is golden. But sometimes silence cuts deeper than words. When my daughter-in-law looked me in the eyes and said, "Keep, you do nothing," something inside me shattered. I wasn't expecting a thank you or even kindness, just a bit of respect. But what followed that one sentence changed the meaning of family, pride, and forgiveness forever. I am Mira, 63 years old, a retired schoolteacher. For most of my life I believed I'd raised my son Rohan to be a man of values, respectful, kind, grounded. When he married Priya, I was overjoyed. She was intelligent, graceful, and polite. I thought to myself, finally the daughter I never had. But as months passed, small changes began to appear, like cracks beneath polished marble. Rohan became busy, always on his phone or laptop. Priya, on the other hand, seemed to grow colder, distant. At first I blamed myself, perhaps I interfered too much or asked too many questions. One morning while making tea, I overheard her speaking to her friend on the phone. Her words pierced through me like splinters. "She just sits there all day pretending to help. I wish she'd stop acting like she runs the house." I remember standing frozen, the kettle hissing, my heart heavier than the silence that followed. Still I said nothing. I thought, she's young, she'll understand one day. A few weeks later, Rohan and Priya hosted a dinner party for their friends. I helped cook, cleaned the table, arranged flowers, quietly, lovingly, the way mothers do. After the guests left, I was exhausted. I reached for the dishes to wash them. That's when it happened. Priya turned sharply and said, "Keep, you do nothing. I'll handle it." Her tone wasn't kind, it was a dismissal. A command. 3 words that erased decades of motherhood, sacrifice, and love. I didn't argue. I just walked to my room. But inside something changed. For days I stayed quiet. I didn't cook, didn't clean, didn't help. I did nothing, just as she'd said. And soon chaos bloomed. The kitchen grew messy, clothes piled up. Meals were late, tempers flared. Rohan snapped at Priya, asking why things weren't done. That evening, I watched from my corner chair as they argued. Priya burst into tears. She said, "Your mother, she just stopped caring." And I finally spoke. Calmly, firmly. "No, my dear. I stopped doing because you said I do nothing. I wanted to show you what nothing truly looks like." The room went silent. Rohan looked stunned. Priya's face softened into realization. Later that night, Priya knocked on my door. She didn't say much, just held my hands and whispered, "I'm sorry." We both cried, quietly, sincerely. And from that day things changed. Not perfectly, but enough. She began asking for my advice, not out of obligation but respect. And I learned something too, that silence, when chosen wisely, can be the loudest teacher of all. So, if someone ever tells you, you do nothing, remember, sometimes doing nothing can reveal everything. Because love and respect aren't measured by words. They're shown in how we treat the hands that once held us steady. Would you like me to tailor this story's tone and pacing for narration, e.g., with dramatic pauses and voiceover cues? Or would you prefer it formatted as a script ready for a storytelling video with scene directions and emotion markers? The next morning, the sunlight streamed gently through the window. I woke up early, the way I always did, but for the first time in weeks, there was a quiet peace in my chest. I heard soft footsteps outside my room. When I opened the door, Priya was already there, holding a tray with tea made just the way I like it, with ginger and a touch of cardamom. She smiled shyly, unsure if I would accept it. I took the cup, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't cold anymore. It was warm, forgiving. Later that day, she joined me in the kitchen. We cooked together side by side, and she listened to my little stories, the kind Rohan used to laugh at when he was a boy. She even asked me how to make his favorite kheer. I could feel the bridge slowly being rebuilt, plank by plank. Not with grand gestures but with small, sincere ones. When Rohan came home that evening, he looked surprised to see us laughing. He put his arm around Priya and said, "This is how I always wanted my home to feel." His voice trembled slightly, as if he'd been afraid it might never feel like this again. Days turned into weeks. Priya began calling me Ma instead of Auntie. And that single word held more love than any apology could. Sometimes she would bring me flowers after work, or sit beside me on the balcony, watching the sunset without saying a word. There was peace in that quiet companionship. And though the words "keep, you do nothing" still echo in my memory, they no longer sting. Instead, they remind me of a turning point. The day pride and misunderstanding gave way to empathy and grace. Because in the end, every family has storms. What matters isn't who caused the rain, but who is willing to stand in it until the sun comes out again. Sometimes, in the evenings, when the sky fades from gold to blue and the sound of distant traffic hums like an old lullaby, I sit on the balcony and think about how fragile relationships can be. How a few careless words can build invisible walls between people who were once inseparable. I remember my own early days as a daughter-in-law, trembling under the weight of my mother-in-law's expectations, trying to please her in ways that never seemed enough. Back then, I had promised myself that I would be different, that I would never make another woman feel the way I did. But time, it seems, has a quiet way of testing every promise we make to ourselves. One afternoon while I was folding laundry, Priya walked in carrying a basket of freshly washed clothes. "Let me help you, Ma," she said softly. I looked up and smiled, a little surprised. Her voice had changed. It carried gentleness now, where once there had been sharpness. She sat beside me, matching my rhythm, folding each piece carefully, aligning corners with a precision that made me smile. For a few moments we didn't speak. The air between us was full of something new. Not silence born of distance, but of understanding. After a while she said quietly, "I didn't know how much you did until you stopped. I thought managing a house was simple. I thought I could handle everything myself." She hesitated, then added, "But I was wrong." Her confession wasn't dramatic. It came like the slow unfolding of a truth that had been waiting patiently to be spoken. I didn't say anything right away. Instead, I reached over and placed my hand on hers. "We all learn," I said. "Sometimes the hardest lessons come from the smallest words." From that day on, Priya began including me in her decisions: what to cook, how to arrange the living room, even which curtains to buy. She would ask for my opinion, and not in a polite, superficial way, but with genuine curiosity. It wasn't about control anymore. It was about connection. Slowly, our conversations moved beyond the household. She told me about her work, her dreams, her fears. She spoke of how lonely it sometimes felt to balance everything: the expectations of a wife, an employee, a daughter-in-law. I listened, really listened, the way a mother listens when her child is finally ready to speak from the heart. Rohan noticed the change too. He would often come home and find us sitting together, sipping tea, laughing softly. Once he said, "Ma, I don't know what's different these days, but the house feels lighter. It feels like home again." I looked at him and smiled. He didn't know that the weight he felt before wasn't just from tension. It was from unspoken pain resting in every corner of the house, like dust that no one had noticed. One evening as we prepared dinner, Priya played soft music on her phone. The smell of cumin and coriander filled the air, and I found myself humming along to an old song I used to sing when Rohan was little. Priya joined in, her voice slightly off-key but full of warmth. We both laughed, and for a fleeting second, I felt as though time had folded back on itself, letting me relive the joy of having family close, of belonging. Later, after dinner, Priya brought her old photo albums and sat beside me. "I thought you might want to see these," she said. The pictures showed her as a little girl, smiling in school uniforms, standing beside her parents, holding a tiny puppy in her arms. I could see traces of the woman she had become in the child she once was, the same spark in her eyes, the same tilt of the head. As she flipped through the pages, she told me stories from her childhood. Her mother's long working hours, her father's gentle but distant nature, how she had to grow up quickly and learn to stand alone. It was then I understood. Her harshness had never been about me. It was a shield built long before she entered my life. She had carried her strength like armor, because she had been taught that vulnerability meant weakness. I felt something inside me soften even more. We all wear armor, I thought, some to protect, some to hide the wounds underneath. The next morning I woke early and found Priya asleep on the sofa, her laptop open beside her, the glow from the screen flickering across her tired face. She must have been working late again. I covered her with a shawl and stood there for a while, looking at her the way I used to look at Rohan when he was small. A quiet mix of love and worry. In that moment I didn't see a daughter-in-law. I saw a young woman trying her best, just as I once had. When she woke, she looked embarrassed. "I didn't mean to fall asleep here," she said, rubbing her eyes. I smiled. "That's all right, child. Even warriors need rest." She laughed softly, and something about that moment, The easy way she smiled, the gentle comfort between us, made the house feel alive again. Over the following weeks, life settled into a rhythm that felt natural, effortless. Sometimes Priya cooked breakfast before leaving for work. Other times I did. We shared small things, a cup of tea before she left, a walk together in the evening, laughter over silly television dramas. There was no grand transformation, no cinematic ending, just quiet healing, steady and sure. One rainy evening I sat by the window watching the drops trace lines down the glass. Priya came and placed a blanket around my shoulders. "You'll catch a cold, Ma," she said. I smiled and turned to her. The rain shimmered in her eyes, and I realized how far we'd come from that day when she said, "Keep you do nothing." Those words had once broken something in me, but now they seemed like the beginning of something else. A conversation that had taken months to finish, a bond rebuilt from silence and forgiveness. As the rain fell harder, she sat beside me, resting her head lightly on my shoulder. We didn't speak. The world outside blurred into silver, and the only sound was the steady rhythm of the rain mingling with the quiet beat of our hearts. The rain stopped that night, but something inside me kept moving, softly, steadily, like a current beneath still water. I could feel it every time Priya smiled at me, every time Rohan reached out to hold both our hands at dinner, every time laughter replaced the cold silence that once filled our home. I had learned that healing doesn't happen with a single apology or moment of realization. It happens quietly, in the small acts of love that follow. Weeks turned into months, and our house began to breathe again. The air no longer carried tension but warmth, the kind that settles into the walls and lingers long after the lights are out. Priya started calling me before leaving work, not out of formality but affection. Sometimes she would say, "Ma, I'm stopping by the market. Do you need anything?" Or, "I tried that recipe you taught me, it finally came out right." Those small words meant more to me than grand gestures ever could. They were proof that we had crossed the bridge that once seemed impossible to rebuild. One Sunday morning, Rohan surprised us with an idea. "Let's take a family picture," he said. It had been years since we'd taken one together. Priya laughed and protested, saying her hair wasn't right, that she needed to change. But I could see the sparkle in her eyes. She wanted that moment too. We set up the camera in the garden, the same place where I had planted jasmine years ago. Its fragrance still filled the air, sweet and nostalgic. As the timer ticked down, Rohan stood between us, his arms around both of our shoulders. For a fleeting second, as the shutter clicked, I saw our reflections in the lens. Not as three separate lives, but as one story, woven together through misunderstanding, patience, and love. That photograph now hangs in our living room, a quiet testament to everything we overcame without saying too much. A few days later, Priya brought home a small clay pot with a delicate green plant sprouting from it. "It's for you, Ma," she said. "It's called a peace lily. They say it purifies the air." I smiled, touching its soft leaves. "And the heart," I added, and she nodded as if she understood what I meant. That little plant now sits by the window where the sunlight pours in each morning. I water it every day, not out of duty but gratitude. One evening, Rohan had to leave for a week-long business trip. Before he left, he hugged me and whispered, "Take care of each other, Ma. You and Priya are my peace." His words lingered long after he was gone. That week, Priya and I spent more time together than ever. We cooked new recipes, watched old movies, shared stories of our childhoods. I told her how Rohan used to bring me wildflowers from the park when he was little, and she laughed, saying, "Now I know where he gets his tenderness from." But there was one moment that etched itself into my heart forever. It was late one night, the house quiet, the kind of silence that invites truth to step forward. Priya came into my room holding an old diary, mine though I hadn't seen it in years. "I found this in the cupboard," she said. "May I read a little?" I hesitated, then nodded. She sat on the edge of my bed and began reading softly. It was a page I had written years ago after Rohan's wedding. "I hope my new daughter finds comfort here. I will try to be her shelter, not her shadow." When she finished, her eyes shimmered with tears. She looked at me and said, "You were always my shelter, Ma. I was just too proud to see it." Those words undid something deep within me. Something that had been knotted for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without the weight of old pain. I pulled her into my arms, and for the first time, she hugged me like a daughter, Not out of obligation but love. It wasn't a moment of forgiveness. It was a moment of understanding. And that, I realized, is what truly heals a home. After that night, I often found myself watching her with quiet admiration. The way she balanced her work and home. The way she remembered to check if I'd taken my medicine. The way she left notes for Rohan reminding him to call. I saw in her the same determination I had once carried, and it filled me with pride. Time had shaped her, just as it had shaped me, and somehow our edges fit together now like two pieces of a puzzle that had finally found their place. The world outside kept moving, seasons changed, neighbors came and went. But inside our home, peace settled like a gentle, lasting fragrance. Every morning I brewed tea for us both. We sat together on the balcony, watching the sun rise over the rooftops, each dawn carrying a quiet promise that we had made it through the storm. One morning, as we sat in that familiar stillness, Priya said, "Do you remember the day I told you, keep you do nothing?" Her tone was half regret, half wonder. I looked at her and smiled. "Yes," I said softly. "I remember it well." She exhaled, her voice trembling. "I think about it often. It was the worst thing I ever said." I shook my head. "No, my dear. Sometimes the harshest words are the ones that open our eyes. Without that day, we might never have truly seen each other." She leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. The jasmine in the garden swayed gently in the breeze, carrying its scent through the open window. "You're not just my mother-in-law anymore," she whispered. "You're my mother." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. In that silence, I felt years of distance dissolve. I felt her heart against mine, steady, strong, familiar. And I realized that family isn't defined by titles or roles. It's built in moments like these. Quiet, unassuming, eternal. Now, when I look at her bustling around the kitchen or hear her humming softly while setting the table, I feel a calm pride rise within me. Not because I won or proved a point, but because love found its way back through the cracks. We are not the same people we were that day when those painful words were spoken. We are softer now, wiser, more forgiving. And as I sit by the window each night, the peace lily glowing in the moonlight, I think about how easily love can be lost, and how beautifully it can return, if we are patient enough to let it. The words that once broke me have become the roots of something unshakable. Because sometimes it takes losing your place to truly understand where you belong. And now I know I belong right here in this home, in this love, in this quiet redemption that grew from a single sentence and became the story of us.